Okay, got a news story here that has taken me on a ride. Yesterday, Trump pardoned or actually on Wednesday of this week, Trump pardoned the Binance founder, Changpeng Zhao. And if you don't recall, Binance entered into, in November 2023, they entered into a $4.3 billion a plea agreement with U.S. Department of Justice. And Binance was caught allowing their website, their exchange, to be used to traffic funds and different coins for terrorists, for human traffickers, drug traffickers, sanctioned individuals that had relations and were moving money around for Russia, Iran, Venezuela, North Korea. It was bad. And it's the largest ever of its kind plea agreement. It involved multiple U.S. agencies that were after Binance for the criminality that they were not just engaged in on the banking side, but that they were enabling and that they were participating in by being an exchange, a monetary exchange that allowed for all of these criminal organizations to transact across and to launder their money through. So this indictment was a huge deal. And it happened right after the FTX scandal and what Bankman Fried got caught doing. And Bankman Fried was sentenced to 25 years in prison and still is in prison. So when I saw this headline that Trump had pardoned the Binance founder, I was kind of like, WTF? What is that about? And it had me doing a bit of the Batman face here. Like, there's got to be something more going on here. There's got to be something more going on here. So I started to dig into it, and I went back and looked at that plea agreement announcement, and it's like, man, did they do everything they were supposed to do as part of this plea agreement? And I looked at what was the reasons for it, and like I said, it had to do with transactions for sanctioned countries, and it had to do with some really bad people using Binance, and Binance knew about it. It's not just that this happened and they didn't stop it; they knew that these sorts of transactions were going on, including scams, various hacking groups, and whatnot were using Binance as a means of transacting their extorted money that they took from people after blackmailing them with their private information and extorting industry sectors and corporations, governments. They also knew about the darknet transactions that were happening across Binance. And what they decided to do was not do anything about it. One employee said, we need a banner on the website saying, is washing drug money too hard these days? Come to Binance. We got cake for you. It was no secret within the company, right up to the founder, what they were doing and what they were participating in. And they willingly and intentionally made it possible for criminals to engage in this behavior and use their site. They did everything except market specifically to those criminal groups. And when Binance got in trouble with the U.S., they said, oh, we're not going to operate in the U.S. anymore. But then they still did. They just didn't advertise that they did. And with the pardon from Trump, as part of the plea agreement, Binance was supposed to be in a multi-year, I think it was 3+ years or 3-year monitorship with DOJ and Treasury. Both of them were going to monitor Binance and they had to do certain reporting requirements, and they had to allow investigators to go and check everything to make sure they were complying with the plea agreement. But with a pardon from Trump, that monitoring program, at least on the justice side, is probably going to end. And the monitoring program on the Treasury side could also end if Trump issues an order saying for that to happen, or if Besant takes some action to terminate that monitoring program early. So far, none of this strikes me as good. None of this strikes me as something where I'm like, good move, Trump. No, it doesn't look good at all. Even worse, or what makes it look even worse, is that recently, within the past year, Binance has grown really close to the Trump family. Trump's family has a crypto entity or a business venture that's called World Liberty Financial. And Trump is on the board of it, and so are his sons, and all three of them. And they're not just having a relationship with Binance as far as business, it's a close relationship, and it's one that has enriched the Trump family. Earlier this year, a New York Times report found that the company World Finance is 60% owned by Trump, and 75% of it is of the sales of a certain type of coin on that exchange or in that company's website. The money from it goes to the Trump family. And this has meant that Trump and his family, here they are on the, oops, my thread just jumped on me. I hate it when it jumps like that. Trump and his family have been enriched by this relationship that their company they're invested in, World Liberty Financial, has with Binance, has enriched their family to the tune of over $500 million in the past year. So this pardon a former CEO and founder of Binance by a man who has gained over or around $500 million in wealth in the past year from Binance and the relationship that his crypto company has developed with Binance. I mean, when you put it all together, this pardon starts to look pretty bad, doesn't it? It starts to look at least unethical, if not corrupt. But I had a thought. And my thought goes back to the Batman meme here. I was reminded of Trump's relationship with the Atlantic City casino and the FBI. And longtime viewers of my podcasts and readers of my threads will know that in 1981, when Trump and his family were building a casino in Atlantic City, New Jersey, they reached out to the FBI and said, hey, we want to build this casino, but we're aware that there's an organized crime problem in Atlantic City, and we would like to help the FBI fight organized crime. And the FBI became involved with the building of the Atlantic City casino. And from at least that point in time, 1981, if not before, going back further, Trump and the FBI developed a relationship that has continued to at least 2022. Based on court filings throughout the decades, we are aware that Trump and the Trump organization are FBI assets, or at least have served as FBI assets. And many criminals have gotten caught in sting operations at Trump-owned businesses such as casinos and hotels and restaurants. And Trump himself has been a CHS, or an asset of some sort. And we know as recently as, I believe it was 2022, when a journalist sued the DOJ to try and find out who a source was in a particular criminal case. And it turned out that source was the Trump organization, because the Trump org, as recently as 2022, was an FBI asset. So it made me think, is that going on here? Is World Liberty Financial, being that it's 60% owned by a Trump org business entity, is it also functioning as a FBI asset where it's out to catch people that are mishandling crypto, who are engaged in financial crimes having to do with crypto? If that's what's going on here, then it doesn't seem so corrupt. And its appearance of being corrupt, of being some sort of corrupt or unethical pardon, aids in the cover story and aids in the appearance that you would want an asset that's out there gathering evidence on criminals to have. You wouldn't want it to be viewed as an FBI asset, of course, even though we know from careful examination of court docs over the years that it is. You would definitely want it to take on the appearance of being up for sale, up for influence, right? So I decided this could be one of those types of situations. So I continued my thread and I continued to dig. And the more I dug into it, the less corrupt or unethical the pardon of Changpeng Zhao began to look. The narrative that the Trump administration is putting out, and has for a while, is that the Biden administration had a war on crypto, and that war on crypto is over because this administration is crypto friendly. The thing was, there wasn't a Biden, as far as I can tell, there was not a specific Biden DOJ and Treasury war on crypto. Instead, there was a war on transnational organized crime and terrorism and human trafficking, on dark markets and on financial maneuvers, which give lifeblood to criminal organisms. And I feel confident in that because I've tracked from the first Trump administration through the Biden administration and into this second Trump administration. I've tracked the criminal the criminal justice efforts against these types of groups. And there is a through line and there's a continuation from one administration to the next. And I think the war on crypto is a bit of a narrative fiction. But it's useful to say something like that if you want to catch other crypto criminals, of which there are many, 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 many. So I started looking, and I really liked this Merrick Garland quote where from the announcement in the Binance plea agreement. He said, using new technology to break the law does not make you a disruptor, it makes you a criminal. Which, by the way, I'm not super into crypto, but I like Bitcoin and I like what these new forms of securities represent and what I'm about the technology side of it. I like the technology side of it. And I'm not against them at all. I am against criminals. And so is Trump. So I went and I looked at the sentencing memorandum for Zhao. And I saw that prosecutors had asked for 3 years, which is about, I mean, that's about 7.5 times less than what Samuel Bankman-Fried got with FTX, right? And yet Binance was accused of doing some really, really bad things. So I thought, just 3 years. Seems pretty kind. And then, but it hasn't been 3 years. So what happened with this? I kept digging and I kept going through the court docs and I found my first aha moment. That first aha moment came when I found out that Zhao was living, and I think still does live, in the UAE, United Arab Emirates, which is a country that does not at this time, despite our, I would say, good relationship that the U.S. has with them, an improving relationship with that country. There's no extradition agreement with the UAE and the U.S., which I got to point out, guys, there's a few people who are criminals, and, or at least sus, who are in trouble with the DOJ, who have decided to take residence in the UAE. And that's why. There's no extradition agreement. That's why they're there. The Tate brothers come to mind as one of the recent examples, but there are others. So Zhao, who lived there in the UAE, he could have remained there, guys. He could have just stayed in the UAE and be like, yeah, well, you can't get me here. But he didn't. Instead, he came to the U.S. to cooperate with law enforcement and judicial proceedings that were underway against him and his company. That was in 2022, before the plea agreement. And even before the plea agreement was inked, before it was put together, Zhao started making changes at Binance. And I found 2 pages worth right here of changes he implemented at Binance. It was at his direction prior to the plea agreement, years before it, according to the memorandum, and prior to October 2022, which is before the investigation was even fully done and the prosecution was brought, I believe. He began implementing changes. 2 pages worth. I'm not going to read them all to you, but their AML stands for anti-money laundering. So he immediately started not just cooperating in a meeting with investigators and talking to them about things, about what could change. He started making the changes. The next aha moment I had was I learned from the sentencing memorandum that Zhao brought evidence and information to the authorities at DOJ and Treasury and other U.S. law enforcement entities, including, quote, detailed analysis of complex on-platform cryptocurrency transactions. In other words, Zhao brought to the DOJ and Treasury and others evidence that was on Binance's servers of who transacted what to whom, where, when, how much, all of those things. He helped DOJ follow the money to the criminals who had been using Binance's exchange. He completely flipped. You might as well call him a DOJ asset now. And Binance agreed to continue that cooperation beyond the plea agreement. Zhao ended up being sentenced to just 4 months in prison. But going to prison was a bit risky for him because he had just provided a lot of info and evidence on multiple criminal organizations. And those organizations had transacted billions, if not trillions, of dollars through Binance's exchange over the years. We're talking Italian mafia, Russian mafia, various terror groups, darknet groups, crypto scam, like every type of organized crime you can think of was using Binance. And Zhao gave their transactional data to the US DOJ. His lawyers raised the unique risk that Zhao was going to be facing in prison. And it was even more risky because he's not a U.S. citizen, which means he's not eligible for minimum security prison. And he's a multi-billionaire. He's worth something like $80 billion or something like that. I don't know what it is now. At one time, I think it was like 80 billion. He's one of the richest people in the world, obviously. So, and he turned on all these criminal organizations. So him going to prison was a huge risk, but he did so. And he was there for 4 months. And while he was in prison, Binance satisfied all of its financial penalties and forfeitures, all 4.3 billion. As of June 11th, 2025, they were done. So I'm going to restate what happened here. You see this article right here. When I first glanced at it, and maybe you too, maybe when you first saw this, I thought, what the heck? Why did he pardon this guy after what Binance was involved in? And what is this relationship that Binance has developed with Trump's own family? And you may have read about how much money, they were already rich, but how much more money the Trump family has gained, how their value has gone up by $500 million in just the past year, thanks to this relationship with Binance. And you may have assumed there's some corrupt or unethical, at the minimum, relationship going on here, and that has led to the pardoning of Changpeng Zhao. However, as you go through all of these things, what does it now look for? You kind of dot them down right here. Did Trump pardon a man who enriched his family, or whose company enriched his family by $500 million? Is that the whole story? Or is the greater part of the story Trump pardoned a man who, one, cooperated with law enforcement before there was ever a plea agreement, made appropriate enhancements to security and changes to Binance before the plea agreement was signed, entered into a plea agreement that required $4.3 billion in penalties and forfeitures to be paid, plus a dozen other changes at the company, many of which had already been implemented at Zhao's direction before the plea agreement. A man who provided law enforcement with evidence and information it needed for other investigations, and not just one or two here or there. We're talking about an innumerable number, possibly thousands of investigations could benefit from the data that Zhao turned over. We probably won't know for years because it's going to take a long time to develop those. And they're going to have to be very careful about how they go about it. And Trump pardoned a man who already served his 4-month prison sentence and who stepped down from Binance on the day that he entered that guilty plea. When you know the full story of it, that's a horse of a different color, isn't it? It comes across completely different. It doesn't seem corrupt or unethical to me, but what do you think? Knowing all of the above, does this still have the appearance of an unethical or corruptly influenced pardon? Or does it look like a situation where a pardon is actually the right thing to do? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.